The most famous Romanian of the Middle Ages is undoubtedly Vlad the Impaler. History textbooks teach us that he was a ruler of Wallachia who fought for the good of his people. Legends, on the other hand, speak of a cruel, bloodthirsty lord, intolerant, violent, and irrational to the point of madness. Meanwhile, 20th century literature and Hollywood productions simply transformed him into a vampire, and not a friendly one like this, but rather one like this. As a result, when most foreigners hear the name Vlad the Impaler, they think of Dracula and Transylvania, even though he ruled in Wallachia, and the whole Dracula story is also debatable. Perhaps it's difficult to explain to people in other countries that Vlad the Impaler was an intelligent and talented politician and military leader who wanted independence for his people, because that story sounds quite boring to those who are only looking for sensational tales. However, as Romanians, we should know our history, not just to pass the high school graduation exam, but to avoid being ignorant. So, who was this character and why did he stir up so much controversy? Well, to answer these questions, we need to travel back in time to around 1395 when the Battle of Rovine took place, the one that Mihai Eminescu talks about in The Third Letter. If you remember, there was an old man, Mircea the Elder to be exact, who tells the Turks to go back where they came from because the Romanians will not stand idly by, but will fight for their freedom. The Sultan, of course, scoffs at him, but in the end, it turns out that the old man was actually very serious, and the Turks are put to flight, at least temporarily. Well, this old man from the poem was Vlad the Impaler's grandfather. And if you're wondering why he was called Mircea the Elder, and not Mircea the First, it's not because he was old all the time, but because in Wallachia, rulers were not numbered as in the West. Instead, they preferred to add a surname, a nickname. Thus, Mircea the Elder was the son of Radu I, who was the son of Nicolae Alexandru, who was the son of Basarab I, the founder of Wallachia. Then Mircea the Elder had a son named Vlad Dracul, who also had a son named Vlad the Impaler. I made these clarifications because over time, the father's image has sometimes been superimposed over the son's in writings. That is, Vlad the Impaler was confused with Vlad Dracul. Vlad the Impaler's father was also a ruler of Wallachia, and like Mircea, he didn't get along very well with the Ottomans. To maintain Wallachia's independence, he allied himself with the Hungarians, specifically with the King of Hungary, Sigismund of Luxembourg, who would ultimately play a major role in the legend that haunts Vlad the Impaler to this day. At Sigismund's invitation, Vlad the Impaler's father was received into the chivalric and crusading Order of the Dragon, a military religious society founded by the King of Hungary in 1408 with the purpose of protecting Christendom from Muslims, and within which foreigners were accepted only in exceptional cases. Members of the Order of the Dragon wore dark red garments at ceremonies, and over them a green silk mantle. Around their necks they had a pendant necklace made of two thick gold chains, joined by a double-barred cross which supported an inverted dragon. The dragon, or Balor as it was also called, symbolized the devil, the absolute evil that Christians had to defeat. Historians say that the nickname Dracul, which later became Dracula, derives from the name of the order. For 5 years, from 1431 until the end of 1436, Vlad Dracul lived in Transylvania, in Sighișoara, in a stone house that still exists today. His mission was to guard the passes from Wallachia. During this period, he had 2 sons, Mircea and Vlad. Guess which of them later became Vlad the Impaler? Well, yes, Vlad. Born at the end of 1431, he had a long face, black and curly hair, and large green eyes. And because he was the grandson of a ruler, from the age of 6, he was sent to learn the trade of arms, to shoot with bows, wield a sword, throw a mace, ride, and swim. I haven't even learned to ride a bike. He also had to learn European languages and study military art and state leadership concepts that were not much different from those articulated by Machiavelli in his book, The Prince. The era in which Vlad the Impaler grew up was not a very peaceful one, as the interests of the great powers of the time had found their meeting place right on our lands. In this context, in the summer of 1444, after a peace treaty was concluded between Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, a peace that Wallachia had also adhered to, Vlad Dracul was forced to send 2 of his sons, Radu and Vlad, to the Turks as hostages. They remained locked in an isolated fortress in the Anatolian mountains. This period of captivity played an important role in Vlad's formation and rise to power. It seems that the Turks tried to turn him into a future puppet ruler for the Ottoman Empire. In 1447, Vlad the Impaler's father was assassinated, and his older brother Mircea was tortured and buried alive by boyars from Târgoviște at the command of Vladislav II, a rival for the Wallachian throne. You see, there was a historical feud between two branches of the princely family. There were on one hand the descendants of Mircea the Elder, called the Draculești, and on the other hand the descendants of Dan Faber, Mircea the Elder's brother, called the Danești. They kept assassinating each other under the pretext of revenge or with the goal of conquering the Wallachian throne. The boyars around the throne were interested in maintaining this conflict because they profited from favoring one camp or the other. After assassinating Vlad Dracul, Vladislav II took power, but it wouldn't last long. Immediately after, Vlad the Impaler was released from prison, and at just 17 years old he was helped by Turkish troops to take the Wallachian throne for the first time. But it wouldn't last long. 2 months later, he was removed from the throne by the same Vladislav II and was forced to seek refuge in Moldova, where in 1449 he befriended the son of the then ruler, a certain Stefan. Perhaps you've heard of him. He's called the Great. Anyway, at that time he wasn't so great, he was just a child, but he became a sworn brother with Vlad the Impaler. And because it was the Middle Ages and rulers were almost always being killed, in 1451 Stefan's father was treacherously murdered by a rival for the throne. So Vlad and Stefan were forced to flee to Transylvania, where they found protection with Iancu of Hunedoara, and where they befriended his son Mateaș. Mateaș, the future Matei Corvin, king of Hungary. Here, Vlad the Impaler waited until August 1456, when he finally managed to get rid of his mortal enemy, Vladislav II, who was killed by treacherous boyars. Again, Vlad the Impaler became a ruler, and one of the first things he did was to take revenge on the boyars. Not the ones who killed Vladislav, but the ones who killed his brother and his father. On Easter Sunday of 1459, he arrested all the boyar families who had participated in the feast. The oldest were impaled, and the rest were forced to walk the 100-kilometer road from the capital to Poianari, where they were made to build a fortification on the ruins of an old fortress. Today it is known as Poianari Citadel and is located just a few kilometers from the Vidraru Dam on the Argeș River. In the first 3 years of his reign, Vlad the Impaler consolidated his position, soon becoming famous for his brutal methods of punishment. The punishment he applied to the boyars horrified his contemporaries. This has been much discussed, but one thing is certain. At that time, cruelty was extremely common all over the world. As punishment, people were skinned, boiled, beheaded, blinded, strangled, hanged, burned, fried, dismembered, nailed, buried alive, and many others. Vlad the Impaler chose impalement as a form of execution, but he did not invent this procedure. He saw it with the Turks, who applied it on a large scale, just as the Romans centuries before applied crucifixion, and the Hungarians breaking on the wheel. Anyway, despite all his brutal punishments, in the end, Vlad's most terrifying decision was when he decided to stop paying tribute to the Turks, even though they had helped him ascend the throne. I guess he ended up screwing the Turks too. Vlad wanted to maintain Wallachia's independence and relied on the support of Stefan the Great, the ruler of Moldova, and Matei Corvin, the king of Hungary, in the event of a conflict with the Ottomans. Surprised by the Impaler's defiance, Sultan Mehmed II prepared a fitting response. This Mehmed was already a legendary figure in the Ottoman world, being the one who had conquered Constantinople in 1453. Thus, in the spring of 1462, the Sultan arrived at the Danube at the head of a huge army of over 100,000 men and 175 warships. Vlad the Impaler's army, according to the most generous estimates, numbered 30,000 soldiers. Imagine what followed, or don't imagine, let me tell you. The Turks did not wipe the Romanians off the face of the earth. On the contrary, knowing he was numerically inferior, the Impaler applied the tactic of harassment. He scorched the earth, poisoned the wells, and attacked Turkish detachments sent out for food. In this oppressive atmosphere in which the hungry and frightened Turkish armies advanced through the desolate country, Vlad the Impaler's great blow took place, the night attack of June 16, 1462. A legendary attack meant to further demoralize the Ottoman army, in which Vlad infiltrated the enemy camp during the night and tried to kill the Sultan, Haimd, locked in an isolated fortress in the Anatolian mountains. Unfortunately, however, he escaped, his tent having been mistaken for that of a vizier. Nevertheless, the psychological effect of the attack was significant. Many Turks were killed, and the Sultan, according to accounts, left the camp secretly and shamefully, and seeing the great loss suffered by his own, he gave the order to retreat. According to the chronicles of the time, the Sultan left the Impaler's brother, Radu the Handsome, as a puppet ruler. The Sultan had held him captive for 14 years after Vlad's release because he was more handsome, and the Sultan liked him, and precisely because he liked him, he left him in Wallachia with the idea that he would attract to his side all the boyars who opposed Vlad, and in this way get rid of the Impaler once and for all. The betrayal of the boyars was the only solution the Turks saw. And the period that followed was extremely turbulent because the two brothers constantly tried to strengthen their forces to eliminate each other. Unlike Vlad the Impaler, who wanted to continue the anti-Ottoman struggle, Radu the Handsome offered the boyars peace and friendship with the Sultan, and in the end, they sided with him. These boyars switched sides without scruple. I guess they were like politicians today. Under these circumstances, abandoned by most of the boyars in October 1462, Vlad the Impaler went to Transylvania to ask for help from his ally Matei Corvin. But Matei, instead of helping him, arrested him, accusing him of treason. To this day, it is not known why Matei Corvin did this, but he had to justify it somehow, because he had just imprisoned one of the most glorious opponents of the Ottomans, as well as a great supporter of Christianity. That is, the Pope was starting to ask questions. It seems that some Transylvanian Saxons presented Matei Corvin with some letters in which Vlad apparently betrayed him to the Turks. Most historians agree that those letters were forged, or that maybe Matei Corvin even wrote them to justify the gesture. It is also said that Matei Corvin spread stories about Vlad and his cruelty, effectively using a kind of propaganda to tarnish his name. Thus, the King of Hungary systematically distorted the image of Vlad the Impaler and presented his pathological figure through all diplomatic and non-diplomatic channels. However, the official Turkish chronicles and the Byzantine chronicles present Vlad the Impaler with admiration, the ruler being praised for his exceptional qualities. They do not confirm the draconian and vampiric figure sketched by the Saxons and emphasized to the point of fantasy by Bram Stoker in his novel Dracula, but present a much more realistic figure. Anyway, it's hard to say. As I said, the world was much more violent at that time. Vlad the Impaler remained incarcerated in Visegrad for 12 years, that is until 1475, when he was released at the intervention of his sworn brother Stefan the Great. Also, with Stefan's help, he conquered the throne again and became the ruler of Wallachia for the third time, after having been in prison for 12 years. But it wouldn't last long. Absolutely not surprisingly, the boyars betrayed him again. The Turks supported another puppet ruler, Basarab Laiota, and Vlad was killed. The exact circumstances of his death are not completely clear, but it seems he was pierced from behind with spears in a forest near the Snagov monastery. Some historians have made Vlad the Impaler a character thirsty for blood, plunder, and revenge on the boyars and the Turks, while others have gone so far as to distort history and turn him into a vampire. But if you do a little research, you see that the situation was much more complex than that. It's clear that he was a cruel man in a ruthless world, and although he wasn't perfect, he seems to have tried to fight for the independence of the Romanian people and did so with skill and perseverance, even though he was betrayed more times than the common man could count at the time. He conquered the throne 3 times, faced Ottoman attacks, created alliances for the good of the Romanian people, was held captive for almost half of his life, and impaled tens of thousands of people. A complex man, what can I say? I'd rather let Dimitri Bolintineanu speak. He did not know how to corrupt. He rejected corruption. His tyranny was honest. He wanted to instill fear, that's why he killed. The Impaler was too proud to corrupt people. Vlad the Impaler was ferocious, but he had the ferocity of the lion. And the ferocity of the lion is more dignified than the gentleness of the crocodile.